Okay, welcome to book 10 of Paradise Lost. The average person has never read any of Paradise Lost, but if you did take it in a college class, you probably only read book 1. So you have read 10 times as much as most readers of Paradise Lost have read. And there was an interesting conversation in the Literary Life group about how could anybody think Satan's the hero? And the answer is most people only read book 1. When he's storming around saying awesome things like, we had him on the run, boys. We had got it. We almost had it. And they're like, yeah. Do you not understand this is self-deceit and posturing and pride? But no, they don't. So book 10, if book 9 was the crime, book 10 is the consequence. So here we go. And Milton does a brilliant job in this book of showing us the effects, starting with the relationship between Adam and Eve disintegrating and then it spreading out from there. It's really quite something. So without further ado, let us start with the argument. Book 10, Paradise Lost, the argument. Man's transgression known, the guardian angels forsake paradise and return up to heaven to approve their vigilance, and are approved, God declaring that the entrance of Satan could not be by them prevented. He sends his son to judge the transgressors, who descends and gives sentence accordingly, then in pity clothes them both and reascends. Sin and death sitting till then at the gates of hell, by wondrous sympathy feeling the success of Satan in this new world, and the sin by man there committed, resolved to sit no longer confined in hell, but to follow Satan their sire up to the place of man, to make the way easier from hell to this world to and fro. They pave a broad highway or bridge over chaos, according to the track that Satan first made. Then preparing for earth, they meet him proud of his success returning to hell. Their mutual congratulation. Satan arrives at Pandemonium. In full assembly relates with boasting his success against man. Instead of applause, is entertained with a general hiss by all his audience. Transformed with himself also suddenly into serpents, according to his doom given in paradise. Then deluded with a show of the forbidden tree, springing up before them, they greedily reaching to take of the fruit, chew dust and bitter ashes. The proceedings of sin and death, God foretells the final victory of his Son over them and the renewing of all things, but for the present commands his angels to make several alterations in the heavens and elements. Adam, more and more perceiving his fallen condition, heavily bewails, rejects the condolement of Eve. She persists and at length appeases him. Then, to evade the curse likely to fall on their offspring, proposes to Adam violent ways which he approves not, but conceiving better hope, puts her in mind of the late promise made them, that her seed should be revenged on the serpent, and exhorts her with him to seek peace of the offended deity by repentance and supplication.
Meanwhile, the heinous and despiteful act of Satan done in paradise, and how he and the serpent had perverted Eve, her husband she, to taste the fatal fruit, was known in heaven. For what can scape the eye of God all-seeing, or deceive his heart omniscient, who, in all things wise and just, hindered not Satan to attempt the mind of man, with strength entire and free will armed, complete to have discovered and repulsed whatever wiles of foe or seeming friend. For still they knew, and ought to have still remembered the high injunction not to taste that fruit, whoever tempted, which they not obeying incurred. What could they less? The penalty, and manifold in sin, deserved to fall. Up into heaven from paradise, in haste the angelic guards ascended, mute and sad for man, for of his state by this they knew, much wondering how the subtle fiend had stolen entrance unseen. Soon as the unwelcome news from earth arrived at heaven gate, displeased all were who heard. Dim sadness did not spare that time celestial visages, yet mixed with pity, violated not their bliss. About the new arrived, in multitudes the ethereal people ran to hear and know how all befell. They towards the throne supreme accountable made haste to make appear with righteous plea their utmost vigilance, and easily approved, when the Most High, Eternal Father, from his secret cloud amidst in thunder, uttered thus his voice. Assembled angels, and ye powers returned from unsuccessful charge, be not dismayed nor troubled at these tidings from the earth, which your sincerest care could not prevent, foretold so lately what would come to pass when first this tempter crossed the gulf from hell. I told you then he should prevail and speed on his bad errand. Man should be seduced and flattered out of all, believing lies against his maker, no decree of mine concurring to necessitate his fall, or touch with lightest moment of impulse his free will, to her own inclining left in even scale. But fallen he is. And now what rests but that the mortal sentence pass on his transgression? Death denounced that day, which he presumes already vain and void because not yet inflicted as he feared by some immediate stroke, but soon shall find forbearance, no acquittance, ere day end. Justice shall not return as bounty scorned. But whom send I to judge them? Whom but thee, vicegerent's son? To thee I have transferred all judgment, whether in heaven or earth or hell. Easy it may be seen that I intend mercy colleague with justice, sending thee man's friend, his mediator, his design both ransom and redeemer voluntary, and destined man himself to judge man fallen. So spake the Father, and unfolding bright toward the right hand his glory, on the sun blazed forth unclouded deity. He full resplendent, all his Father manifest expressed, and thus divinely answered mild, Father eternal, thine is to decree, mine both in heaven and earth to do thy will.
Supreme, that thou in me, thy Son, beloved, mayst ever rest well pleased. I go to judge on earth these thy transgressors, but thou knowest whoever judged, the worst on me must light, when time shall be. For so I undertook before thee, and not repenting this obtain of right, that I may mitigate their doom on me derived. Yet I shall temper so justice with mercy, as may illustrate most them fully satisfied and thee appease. Attendants none shall need, nor train, where none are to behold the judgment, but the judged, those two. The third, best absent, is condemned, convict by flight and rebel to all law. Conviction to the serpent none belongs. Thus saying, from his radiant seat, he rose of high collateral glory. Him thrones and powers, princedoms and dominations ministrant, accompanied to heaven gate, from whence Eden and all the coast in prospect lay. Down he descended straight. The speed of gods time counts not, though with swiftest minutes winged. Now was the sun in western cadence low from noon, and gentle airs due at their hour to fan the earth now waked, and usher in the evening cool, when he from wrath more cool came, the mild judge and intercessor both, to sentence man. The voice of God they heard now walking in the garden, by soft winds brought to their ears, while day declined. They heard, and from his presence hid themselves among the thickest trees, both man and wife, till God approaching, thus to Adam called aloud. Where art thou, Adam? Wont with joy to meet my coming seen far off. I miss thee here, not pleased thus entertained with solitude, who where obvious duty erewhile appeared unsought. Or come I less conspicuous, or what change absents thee, or what chance detains? Come forth. He came, and with him Eve more loath, though first to offend, discountenanced both and discomposed. Love was not in their looks, either to God or to each other, but apparent guilt and shame and perturbation and despair, anger and obstinacy and hate and guile, whence Adam faltering long thus answered brief. I heard thee in the garden, and of thy voice afraid, being naked, hid myself. To whom the gracious judge without revile replied, My voice thou oft hast heard, and hast not feared, but still rejoiced. How is it now become so dreadful to thee? That thou art naked, who hath told thee? Hast thou eaten of the tree whereof I gave thee charge thou shouldst not eat? To whom thus Adam, sore beset, replied, O heaven, in evil strait this day I stand before my judge, either to undergo myself the total crime, or to accuse my other self, the partner of my life, whose failing, while her faith to me remains, I should conceal, and not expose to blame by my complaint. But strict necessity subdues me, and calamitous constraint, lest on my head both sin and punishment, however insupportable, be all devolved. Though should I hold my peace, yet thou wouldst easily detect what I conceal. This woman, whom thou madest to be my help, and gavest me as thy perfect gift, so good,
so fit, so acceptable, so divine, that from her hand I could suspect no ill. And what she did, whatever in itself, her doing seemed to justify the deed. She gave me of the tree, and I did eat. To whom the sovereign presence thus replied, was she thy God that her thou didst obey before his voice? Or was she made thy guide superior, or but equal, that to her thou didst resign thy manhood and the place wherein God set thee above her, made of thee and for thee, whose perfection far excelled hers in all real dignity? Adorned she was indeed and lovely to attract thy love, not thy subjection, and her gifts were such as under government well seemed, unseemly to bear rule, which was thy part, and person hadst thou known thyself aright. So having said, he thus to Eve in few, say, woman, what is this which thou hast done? To whom sad Eve with shame nigh overwhelmed, confessing soon, yet not before her judge, bold or loquacious, thus abashed replied, the serpent me beguiled, and I did eat. Which when the Lord God heard without delay to judgment, he proceeded on the accused serpent, though brute, unable to transfer the guilt on him who made him instrument of mischief and polluted from the end of his creation, justly then accursed as vitiated in nature. More to know concerned not man, since he no further knew, nor altered his offense. Yet God at last to Satan, first in sin, his doom applied, though in mysterious terms judged as then best, and on the serpent thus his curse let fall. Because thou hast done this, thou art accursed, above all cattle, each beast of the field. Upon thy belly groveling thou shalt go, and dust shall eat all the days of thy life. Between thee and the woman I will put enmity, and between thine and her seed. Her seed shall bruise thy head, thou bruise his heel. So spake this oracle, then verified when Jesus, son of Mary, second Eve, saw Satan fall like lightning down from heaven. Prince of the air, then rising from his grave, spoiled principalities and powers, triumphed in open show, and with ascension bright, captivity led captive through the air. The realm itself of Satan long usurped, whom he shall tread at last under our feet, even he who now foretold his fatal bruise, and to the woman thus his sentence turned. Thy sorrow I will greatly multiply. By thy conception, children thou shalt bring in sorrow forth into thy husband's will, thine shall submit, he over thee shall rule. On Adam last thus judgment he pronounced, because thou hast hearkened to the voice of thy wife, and eaten of the tree concerning which I charged thee, saying, thou shalt not eat thereof. Cursed is the ground for thy sake. Thou in sorrow shalt eat thereof all the days of thy life. Thorns also and thistles it shall bring thee forth, unbid, and thou shalt eat the herb of the field. In the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread, till thou return unto the ground, for thou out of the ground wast taken. Know thy birth.
For dust thou art, and shalt to dust return. So judged he man, both judge and Savior sent, and the instant stroke of death denounced that day, removed far off. Then, pitying how they stood before him naked to the air, that now must suffer change, disdain not to begin thenceforth the form of servant to assume, as when he washed his servants' feet. So now, as father of his family, he clad their nakedness with skins of beasts or slain, or as the snake with youthful coat repaid, and thought not much to clothe his enemies, nor he their outward only with the skin of beasts, but inward nakedness much more opprobrious, with his robe of righteousness, arraying, covered from his father's sight. To him with swift descent he upreturned, into his blissful bosom reassumed in glory as of old, to him appeased all, though all knowing, as what had passed with man recounted, mixing intercessions sweet. Meanwhile, ere thus was sinned and judged on earth, within the gates of hell sat sin and death, and counterview within the gates that now stood wide open, belching outrageous flame far into chaos, since the fiends passed through. Sin opening, who thus now to death began. Oh, son, why sit we here each other viewing idly, while Satan, our great author, thrives in other worlds, and happier seed provides for us, his offspring dear? It cannot be but that success attends him, if mishap ere this he had returned, with fury driven by his avengers, since no place like this can fit his punishment or their revenge. Methinks I feel new strength within me rise, wings growing and dominion giving me large beyond this deep. Whatever draws me on, or sympathy or some connatural force, powerful at greatest distance to unite with secret amity, things of like kind by secretest conveyance. Thou, my shade inseparable, must with me along, for death from sin no power can separate. But, lest the difficulty of passing back stay his return, perhaps over this gulf impassable, impervious, let us try adventurous work, yet to thy power and mine not unagreeable, to found a path over this main from hell to that new world where Satan now prevails, a monument of merit high to all the infernal hosts, easing their passage hence for intercourse or transmigration as their lot shall lead. Nor can I miss the way, so strongly drawn by this new felt attraction and instinct. Whom thus the meager shadow answered soon. Go, whither fate and inclination strong leads thee. I shall not lag behind, nor err the way, thou leading. Such a scent I draw of carnage, prey innumerable, and taste the savor of death from all things that there live. Nor shall I to the work thou enterprisest be wanting, but afford thee equal aid. And so saying, with delight, he snuffed the smell of mortal change on earth, as when a flock of ravenous fowl, though many a league remote, against the day of battle to a field where armies lie encamped, come flying, lured
with scent of living carcasses designed for death, the following in bloodied fight. So scented the grim future, and upturned his nostril wide into the murky air, sagacious of his quarry from so far, then both from out hell gates into the waste, wide anarchy of chaos, damp and dark, flew diverse and with power, their power was great, hovering upon the waters, what they met, solid or slimy as in raging sea, tossed up and down, together crowded drove, from each side shoaling towards the mouth of hell, as when two polar winds blowing adverse upon the Cronian sea together drive mountains of ice that stop the imagined way. Beyond Petsora, eastward to the rich Cathanian coast, the aggregated soil, death with his mace petrific, cold and dry as with a trident smote, and fixed as firm as Delos, floating once, the rest his look, bound with Gorgonian rigor, not to move, and with asphaltic slime, broad as the gate, Deep to the roots of hell, the gathered beach they fastened, and the mole immense wrought on over the foaming deep, high arched, a bridge of length prodigious, joining to the wall immovable of this now fenceless world. Forfeit to death, from hence a passage broad, smooth, easy, inoffensive, down to hell. So if great things to small may be compared, Xerxes, the liberty of Greece to yoke, from Susa, his Memnonian palace high, came to the sea, and over Hellespont, bridging his way, Europe with Asia joined, and scourged with many a stroke the indignant waves. Now had they brought the work by wondrous art pontifical, a ridge of pendant rock over the vexed abyss, following the track of Satan to the self-same place where he first lighted from his wing and landed safe from out of chaos to the outside bare of this round world. With pins of adamant and chains they made all fast. Too fast they made, and durable. And now in little space the confines met of empyrean heaven, and of this world, and on the left hand hell, with long interposed 3 several ways, in sight to each of these 3 places led. And now their way to earth they had descried, to paradise first tending, when, behold, Satan, in likeness of an angel bright, betwixt the centaur and the scorpion steering, his zenith, while the sun in Aries rose. Disguised he came, but those, his children dear, their parent soon discerned, though in disguise. He, after Eve seduced, unminded slunk into the woods fast by, and, changing shape to observe the sequel, saw his guileful act by Eve, though all unweeting, seconded upon her husband, saw their shame that sought vain covertures. But when he saw descend the Son of God to judge them, terrified, he fled, not hoping to escape, but shun the present, fearing, guilty, what his wrath might suddenly inflict that past returned by night, and listening where the hapless pair sat in their sad discourse and various plaint, thence gathered his own doom, which understood, not instant, but of bright future time. With joy
and tidings fraught, to hell he now returned, and at the brink of chaos, near the foot of this new pontifice, unhoped, met who to meet him came, his offspring dear. Great joy was at their meeting, and at sight of that stupendous bridge his joy increased. Long he admiring stood, till sin, his fair enchanting daughter, thus the silence. O parent, these are thy magnific deeds, thy trophies, which thou view'st as not thine own. Thou art their author and prime architect, for I no sooner in my heart divined, my heart, which by a secret harmony still moves with thine, joined in connection sweet, that thou on earth hadst prospered, which thy looks now also evidence. But straight I felt, though distant from thee worlds between, yet felt that I must after thee with this thy son. Such fatal consequence unites us 3. Hell could no longer hold us in her bounds, nor this unvoyageable gulf obscure detain from following thy illustrious track. Thou hast achieved our liberty, confined within hell gates till now. Thou us empowered to fortify thus far, and overlay with this portentous bridge the dark abyss. Thine now is all this world. Thy virtue hath won what thy hands builded not. Thy wisdom gained with odds what war hath lost, and fully avenged our foil in heaven. Here thou shalt monarch reign, there didst not. There let him still victor sway, as battle hath adjudged, from this new world retiring, by his own doom alienated, and henceforth monarchy with thee divide of all things, parted by the imperial bounds, his quadrature from thy orbicular world, or try thee now more dangerous to his throne. Whom thus the prince of darkness answered glad, fair daughter, and thou son and grandchild both, high proof ye now have given to be the race of Satan, for I glory in the name, antagonist of heaven's almighty king, amply have merited of me, of all the infernal empire that so near heaven's door, triumphal with triumphal act have met, mine with this glorious work, and made one realm, hell in this world, one realm, one continent of easy warfare. Therefore, while I descend through darkness on your road with ease to my associate powers, them to acquaint with these successes, and with them rejoice, you too this way, among these numerous orbs, all yours, right down to paradise descend. There dwell and reign in bliss, thence on the earth dominion exercise, and in the air, chiefly on man, sole Lord of all declared. Him first make sure your thrall, and lastly kill. My substitutes I send ye, and create plenipotent on earth of matchless might, issuing from me. On your joint vigor now my hold of this new kingdom all depends. Through sin to death exposed by my exploit, if your joint power prevail, the affairs of hell no detriment need fear. Go and be strong. So saying, he dismissed them. They with speed their course through thickest constellations held. Spreading their bane, the blasted stars looked wan, and planet struck, real eclipse, then suffered, the other way Satan went down.
Joan, I think you're muted.
Whoops. The other way Satan went down the causey to Hellgate. On either side, disparted chaos overbuilt exclaimed, and with rebounding surge the bars assailed that scorned his indignation. Through the gate, wide open and unguarded, Satan passed, and all about found desolate. For those appointed to sit there had left their charge, flown to the upper world. The rest were all far to the inland retired, about the walls of Pandemonium, city and proud seat of Lucifer, so by illusion called, of that bright star to Satan paragon. There kept their watch the legions, while the grand in council sat, solicitous what chance might intercept their emperor sent. So he departing gave command, and they observed, as when the Tartar from his Russian foe by Astrakhan over the snowy plains retires, or Bactrian Sophie from the horns of Turkish crescent leaves all waste beyond the realm of Aludol in his retreat to Taurus or Casbine. So these the late heaven-banished host left desert utmost hell many a dark league, reduced in careful watch round their metropolis, and now expecting each hour their great adventurer from the search of foreign worlds. He through the mist unmarked, in show plebeian angel militant of lowest order passed, and from the door of that Plutonian hall, invisible, ascended his high throne, which under state of richest texture spread, at the upper end was placed in regal luster. Down a while he sat, and round about him saw unseen. At last, as from a cloud, his fulgent head and shape star bright appeared, or brighter, clad with what permissive glory since his fall was left him, or false glitter. All amazed at that so sudden blaze, the Stygian throne bent their aspect, and whom they wished beheld, their mighty chief returned. Loud was the acclaim. Forth rushed in haste the great consulting peers, raised from their dark divan, and with like joy congratulant approached him, who with hand silence and with these words attention won. Thrones, dominations, princedoms, virtues, powers, for in possession such, not only of right, I call ye and declare ye now, returned successful beyond hope, to lead ye forth triumphant out of this infernal pit, abominable, accursed, the house of woe and dungeon of our tyrant. Now possess as lords a spacious world, to our native heaven little inferior, by my adventure hard with peril great achieved. Long were to tell what I have done, what suffered, with what pain voyaged the unreal, vast, unbounded deep of horrible confusion, over which by sin and death a broad way now is paved to expedite your glorious march. But I toiled out my uncouth passage, forced to ride the untraceable abyss, plunged in the womb of unoriginal night and chaos wild, that jealous of their secrets fiercely opposed my journey strange, with clamorous uproar protesting fate supreme. Thence how I found the new created world, which fame in heaven long had foretold, a fabric wonderful of absolute perfection, therein man,
placed in a paradise, by our exile made happy. Him by fraud I have seduced from his creator, and the more to increase your wonder with an apple. He thereat offended, worth your laughter, hath given up both his beloved man and all his world to sin and death, a prey, and so to us without our hazard, labor, or alarm, to range in and to dwell, and over man to rule, as over all he should have ruled. True is, me also he hath judged, or rather me not, but the brute serpent in whose shape man I deceived. That which to me belongs is enmity, which he will put between me and mankind. I am to bruise his heel, his seed, when is not set, shall bruise my head. A world who would not purchase with a bruise, or much more grievous pain. Ye have the account of my performance. What remains, ye gods, but up and enter now into full bliss? So having said, a while he stood expecting their universal shout and high applause to fill his ear, when contrary he hears on all sides from innumerable tongues a dismal universal hiss, the sound of public scorn. Excuse me. You take over.
He wondered but not long had leisure, wondering at himself now more. His visage drawn he felt to sharp and spare. His arms clung to his ribs, his legs entwining each other, till supplanted down he fell, a monstrous serpent on his belly prone, reluctant but in vain. A greater power now ruled him, punished in the shape he sinned according to his doom. He would have spoke, but hiss for hiss returned with forked tongue to forked tongue. For now were all transformed alike to serpents, all as accessories to his bold riot. Dreadful was the din of hissing through the hall, thick swarming now with complicated monsters, head and tail, scorpion and asp, and amphisbaena dire, Ceristus horned, Hydrus and Elaps deer, and Dipsus. Not so thick swarmed once the soil, bedropped with blood of Gorgon, or the isle of Physius. But still greatest, he the midst now dragon grown, larger than whom the sun engendered in the Pythian vale in slime, huge Python, and his power no less he seemed above the rest still to retain. They all him followed, issuing forth to the open field, where all yet left of that revolted rout, heaven fallen, in station stood, or just array, sublime with expectation, when to see in triumph issuing forth their glorious chief. They saw, but other sight instead, a crowd of ugly serpents. Horror on them fell, and horrid sympathy, for what they saw they felt themselves now changing. Down their arms, down fell both spear and shield. Down they as fast, and the dire hiss renewed, and the dire form catched by contagion, like in punishment as in their crime. Thus was the applause they meant turned to exploding hiss, triumph to shame, cast on themselves from their own mouths. There stood a grove hard by, sprung up, with this their change, his will who reigns above to aggravate their penance, laden with fair fruit, like that which grew in paradise, the bait of Eve used by the tempter. On that prospect strange,
their earnest eyes they fixed imagining for one forbidden tree a multitude now risen, to work them further woe or shame, yet parched with scalding thirst and hunger fierce, though to delude them sent, could not abstain, but on they rolled in heaps, and up the trees climbing, sat thicker than the snaky locks that curled Megaria. Greedily they plucked the fruitage fair to sight, like that which grew near that bituminous lake where Sodom flamed. This more delusive, not the touch, but taste deceived. They fondly thinking to allay their appetite with gust, instead of fruit, chewed bitter ashes, which the offended taste with spattering noises rejected. Oft they essayed, hunger and thirst constraining, drugged as oft with hatefullest disrelish, writhed their jaws with soot and cinders filled. So oft they fell into the same illusion, not as man whom they triumph once lapsed. Thus were they plagued and worn with famine, long and ceaseless hiss, till their lost shape permitted, they resumed, yearly enjoined, some say, to undergo this annual humbling certain numbered days, to dash their pride and joy for man seduced. However, some tradition they dispersed among the heathen of their purchase got, and fabled how the serpent, whom they called Ophion, with Eurynomé, the wide encroaching Eve, perhaps, had first the rule of high Olympus, thence by Saturn driven, and Ops, ere yet Dictaean Jove was born. Meanwhile in paradise the hellish pair too soon arrived. Sin there in power before, once actual, now in body, and to dwell habitual habitant, behind her death close following pace for pace, not mounted yet on his pale horse, to whom sin thus began. Second of Satan sprung, all-conquering death, what thinkest thou of our empire now? Though earned with travail difficult, not better far than still at hell's dark threshold to have sat watch, unnamed, undreaded, and thyself have starved? Whom thus the sin-born monster answered soon. To me, who with eternal famine pine, alike is hell or paradise or heaven there best, where most with raven I may meet, which here, though plenteous, all too little seems to stuff this maw, this vast unhide-bound corpse. To whom the incestuous mother thus replied, thou therefore on these herbs and fruits and flowers feed first, on each beast next, and fish and fowl no homely morsels, and whatever thing the scythe of time mows down, devour unspared, till I in man residing through the race, his thoughts, his looks, words, actions all infect, and season him thy last and sweetest prey. This said, they both betook them several ways, both to destroy or unimmoral make all kinds, and for destruction to mature sooner or later, which the Almighty seeing from his transcendent seat the saints among, to those bright orders uttered thus his voice. See with what heat these dogs of hell advance to waste and havoc yonder world, which I so fair and good created, and had still kept in that state, had not the folly of man let in these wasteful furies who impute folly to me. So doth the prince of hell and his adherents, that with so much ease I suffer them to enter and possess a place so heavenly, and conniving seem to gratify my scornful enemies, that laugh, as if transported with some fit of passion. I to them had acquitted all, at random yielded up to their misrule, and know not that I called and drew them thither my hell-hounds, to lick up the draught and filth which man's polluting sin with taint hath shed on what was pure, till crammed and gorged, nigh birth was sucked and glutted awful, at one sling of thy victorious arm, well-pleasing Son, both sin and death and yawning grave at last, through chaos hurled, obstruct the mouth of hell forever, and seal up his ravenous jaws. Then heaven and earth renewed shall be made pure to sanctity that shall receive no stain. Till then the curse pronounced on both proceeds. He ended, and the heavenly audience loud sung hallelujah, as the sound of seas through multitude that sung. Just are their ways, righteous are thy decrees on all thy works. Who can accentuate thee? Next to the Son, destined restorer of mankind, by whom new heaven and earth shall to the ages rise, or down from heaven descend. Such was their song, while the Creator, calling forth by name his mighty angels, gave them several charge, as sorted Beth with present things. The sun had first his precept so to move, so shine, as might affect the earth with cold and heat scarce tolerable, and from the north to call decrepit winter, from the south to bring celestial summer's heat. To the blank moon her office they prescribed, to the other five their planetary motions and aspects, and sextile, square, and trine, and opposite of noxious efficacy, and went to join in synod unbenign, and taught the fixed their influence malignant when to shower, which of them rising with the sun, or falling, should prove tempestuous. To the winds they set their corners, when with bluster to confound sea, air, and shore, the thunder went to roll, with terror through the dark aerial hall. Some say he bid his angels turn askance the poles of earth twice 10 degrees and more from the sun's axle. They with labor pushed oblique the centric globe. Some say the sun was bid turn reins from the equinoctial road like distant breath to Taurus, with the 7 Atlantic sisters and the Spartan twins up to the tropic crab, thence down amain by Leo and the Virgin and the scales as deep as Capricorn, to bring in change of seasons to each clime. Else had the spring perpetual smiled on earth with the vernant flowers, equal in days and nights, except by those beyond the polar circles. To them day had unbenighted shone, with a low sun to recompense his distance. In their sight hath rounded still the horizon, and not known, or east or west, which had forbid the snow from cold Estolial land, and south as far beneath Magellan. At that tasted fruit, the sun, as from Thestian banquet, turned his course intended. Else how had the world inhabited, though sinless more than now,
avoided pinching cold and scorching heat? These changes in the heavens, though slow, produced like change on sea and land. Sidereal blast, vapor and mist, and exhalation hot, corrupt and pestilent. Now from the north of Norumbega and the Samoyed shore, bursting their brazen dungeons, armed with ice and snow and hail and stormy gust and flaw, Boreas and Caesius and Argestes loud and Thrasius rend the woods and seas upturn. With adverse blast, upturns them from the south Notus and Afer black, with thunderous clouds from Sierra Leona. Thwart of these as fierce forth rush the Levant, and opponent winds Eurus and Zephyr with their lateral noise, Sirocco and Libecchio. Thus began outrage from lifeless things. But discord, first daughter of sin, among the irrational, death introduced through fierce antipathy. Beast now with beast gan war, and fowl with fowl, and fish with fish. To graze the herb all leaving, devoured each other. Nor stood much in awe of man, but fled him, or with countenance grim glared on him passing. These were from without the growing miseries, which Adam saw already in part, though hid in gloomiest shade, to sorrow abandoned, but worse felt within, and in a troubled sea of passion tossed, thus to disburden sought with sad complaint. O miserable of happy, is this the end of this glorious world, and me so late the glory of that glory, who now become accursed of blessed? Hide me from the face of God, whom to behold was then my height of happiness. Yet well, if here would end the misery, I deserved it, and would bear my own deservings. But this will not serve. All that I eat or drink or shall beget is propagated curse. O voice once heard delightfully, increase and multiply, now death to hear. For what can I increase or multiply but curses on my head? Who of all ages to succeed, but feeling the evil on him brought by me, will curse my head? Ill fare our ancestor impure, for this we may thank Adam. But his thanks shall be the execration. So besides mine own that bide upon me, all from me shall with a fierce reflux on me redound. On me is on their natural center light heavy, though in their place. O fleeting joys of paradise, dear bought with lasting woes, did I request thee, maker, from my clay to mold me man? Did I solicit thee from darkness to promote me, or here place in this delicious garden? As my will concurred not to my being, it were but right and equal to reduce me to my dust, desirous to resign and render back all that I received, unable to perform thy terms too hard, by which I was to hold the good I sought not. To the loss of that sufficient penalty, why hast thou added the sense of endless woes? Inexplicable thy justice seems, yet to say truth too late I thus contest. Then should have been refused those terms whatever, when they were proposed. Thou didst accept them. Wilt thou enjoy the good, then cavil the conditions? And though God made thee without thy leave, what if thy son prove disobedient, and reproved retort, wherefore didst thou beget me? I sought it not. Wouldst thou admit for his contempt of thee that proud excuse? Yet him not thy election, but natural necessity begot. God made thee of choice his own, and of his own to serve him. Thy reward was of his grace. Thy punishment then justly is at his will. Be it so, for I submit his doom is fair, that dust I am, and shall to dust return, a welcome hour whenever. Why delays his hand to execute what his decree fixed on this day? Why do I overlive? Why am I mocked with death and lengthened out to deathless pain? How gladly would I meet mortality my sentence and be earth insensible. How glad would lay me down as in my mother's lap. There I should rest and sleep secure. His dreadful voice no more would thunder in my ears. No fear of worse to me and to my offspring would torment me with cruel expectation. Yet one doubt pursues me still, lest all I cannot die, lest that pure breath of life, the spirit of man which God inspired, cannot perish together with this corporeal clod. Then in the grave, or in some other dismal place, who knows but I shall die a living death? Oh, thought horrid if true. Yet why? It was but breath of life that sins. What dies but what had life and sin? The body properly hath neither. All of me then shall die. Let this appease the doubt, since human reach no further knows. For though the Lord of all be infinite, is his wrath also? Be it, man is not so, but mortal doomed. How can he exercise wrath without end on man whom death must end? Can he make deathless death? That were to make strange contradiction, which to God himself impossible is held, an argument of weakness, not of power. Will he draw out, for anger's sake, finite to infinite in punished man, to satisfy his rigor, satisfied never, that were to extend his sentence beyond dust and nature's law, by which all causes else according still to the reception of their matter act, not to the extent of their own sphere? But say that death be not one stroke, as I supposed, bereaving sense, but endless misery from this day onward, which I feel begun both in me and without me, and so last to perpetuity. Ay me, that fear comes thundering back with dreadful revolution on my defenseless head. Both death and I am found eternal and incorporate both. Nor I on my part single. In me all posterity stands cursed. Fair patrimony that I must leave ye sons. Or were I able to waste it all myself and leave ye none, so disinherited, how would ye bless me, now your curse? Ah, why should all mankind for one man's fault thus guiltless be condemned, if guiltless? But from me what can proceed but all corrupt, both mind and will depraved, not to do only, but to will the same with me? How can they then acquitted stand in sight of God? Him after all disputes.
Forced I absolve all my envisions vain and reasonings, though through mazes lead me still, but to my own conviction. First and last, on me only, as the source and spring of all corruption, all the blame light's due, so might the wrath. Fond wish, couldst thou support the burden heavier than the earth to bear, than all the world much heavier, though divided with that bad woman. Thus what thou desirest and what thou fearest alike destroys all hope of refuge, and concludes thee miserable beyond all past example and future. To Satan, only like both crime and doom. O conscience, into what abyss of fears and horrors hast thou driven me, out of which I find no way, from deep to deeper plunged. Thus Adam to himself lamented loud through the still night, not now as ere man fell, wholesome and cool and mild, but with black air, accompanied with damps and dreadful gloom, which to his evil conscience represented all things with double terror. On the ground outstretched he lay, on the cold ground, and oft cursed his creation. Death as oft accused of tardy execution, since denounced the day of his offense. Why comes not death, said he, with one thrice acceptable stroke to end me? Shall truth fail to keep her word, justice divine not hasten to be just? But death comes not at call, justice divine mends not her slowest pace of prayers or cries. O woods, O fountains, hillocks, dales, and bowers, with other echo late I taught your shades, to answer and resound far other song, whom thus afflicted, when sad Eve beheld, desolate, where she sat, approaching nigh, soft words to his fierce passion she essayed, but her with stern regard he thus repelled. Out of my sight, thou serpent, the name best befits thee with him leagued, thyself as false and hateful, nothing wants, but with thy shape like his, and color serpentine may show thy inward fraud, to warn all creatures from thee henceforth, lest that too heavenly form pretended to hellish falsehood snare them. But for thee I had persisted happy, but not thy pride and wandering vanity, when least was safe, rejecting my forewarning and disdained not to be trusted, longing to be seen, though by the devil himself, him overweening to overreach, but with the serpent meaning, fooled and beguiled by him I by thee. To trust thee from my side, imagined wise, constant, mature, proof against all assaults, and understood not all was but a show, rather than a solid virtue, all but a rib, crooked by nature, bent, as now appears, more to the part sinister from me drawn. Well, if thrown out as supernumerary to my just number found, oh, why did God, creator wise, that people highest heaven, with spirits masculine, create at last this novelty on earth, this fair defect of nature, and would not fill the world at once with men as angels without feminine, or find some other way to generate mankind? This mischief had not then befallen, and more that shall befall innumerable disturbances on earth through female snares.
In straight conjunction with this sex. For either he never shall find out fit mate, but such as some misfortune brings him, or mistake, or whom he wishes most shall seldom gain through her perverseness, but shall see her gained by a far worse, or, if she love, withheld by parents, or his happiest choice too late, shall meet already linked and wedlock bound to a fell adversary, his hate or shame, which infinite calamity shall cause to human life and household peace confound. He added not, and from her turned, but Eve, not so repulsed, with tears that ceased not flowing, and tresses all disordered at his feet, fell humble, and embracing them, besought his peace, and thus proceeded in her plaint. Forsake me not thus, Adam, witness heaven, what love sincere and reverence in my heart I bear thee, and unwitting have offended, unhappily deceived. Thy suppliant I beg and clasp thy knees. Bereave me not whereon I live, thy gentle looks, thy aid, thy counsel, in this uttermost distress, my only strength and stay. Forlorn of thee, whither shall I betake me, where subsist? Well, yet we live scarce one short hour, perhaps, between us two, let there be peace, both joining, as joined in injuries, one enmity against a foe by doom express assigned us, that cruel serpent. On me exercise not thy hatred, for this misery befallen on me, already lost, me than thyself more miserable. Both have sinned, but thou against God only, I against God and thee. And to the place of judgment will return, there with my cries of importune heaven, that all the sentence from thy head remove may light on me, sole cause to thee of all this woe, me only just object of his ire. She ended weeping, and her lowly plight immovable till peace obtained from fault, acknowledged and deplored, in Adam wrought commiseration. Soon his heart relented towards her. His life so late and sole delight, now at his feet submissive in distress. Creature so fair, his reconcilement seeking, his counsel, whom she had displeased, his aid. As one disarmed his anger, all he lost, and thus with peaceful words upraised her soon. Unwary and too desirous as before, so now of what thou knowest not, who desirest the punishment all on thyself. Alas, bear thine own first, ill able to sustain his full wrath, whose thou feelest as yet least part, and my displeasure bearest so ill. If prayers could alter high decrees, I to that place would speed before thee, and be louder heard. That on my head all might be visited, thy frailty and infirmer sex forgiven, to me committed and by me exposed. But rise, let us no more contend, nor blame each other, blamed enough elsewhere, but strive in offices of love, how we might lighten each other's burden in our share of woe, since this day's death denounced, if aught I see, will prove no sudden, but a slow-paced evil. A long day's dying to augment our pain, and to our seed, O hapless seed derived. To whom thus Eve, recovering her heart, replied,
Adam, by sad experiment, I know how little weight my words with thee can find, found so erroneous, thence by just event found so unfortunate. Nevertheless, restored by thee, vile as I am, to place of new acquaintance, hopeful to regain thy love, the sole contentment of my heart, living or dying. From thee I will not hide what thoughts in my unquiet breast are risen, tending to some relief of our extremes, or end, though sharp and sad, yet tolerable, as in our evils and of easier choice. If care of our descent perplex us most, which must be born to certain woe, devoured by death at last, and miserable it is to be to others cause of misery, our own begotten, and of our loins to bring into this cursed world a woeful race, that after wretched life must be at last food for so foul a monster. In thy power it lies, yet ere conception to prevent the race unblessed, to being yet unbegot. Childless thou art, childless remain. So death shall be deceived his glut, and with us too be forced to satisfy his ravenous maw. But if thou judge it hard and difficult, conversing, looking, loving, to abstain from love's due rites, nuptial embraces sweet, and with desire to languish without hope, before the present object languishing with like desire, which would be misery and torment less than none of what we dread, then both ourselves and seed at once to free from what we fear for both, let us make short, let us seek death, or he not found, supply with our own hands his office on ourselves. Why stand we longer shivering under fears that show no end but death, and have the power of many ways to die the shortest choosing, destruction with destruction to destroy? She ended here, or vehement despair broke off the rest. So much of death her thoughts had entertained as dyed her cheeks with pale. But Adam with such counsel nothing swayed. To better hopes his more attentive mind laboring had raised, and thus to Eve replied, Eve, thy contempt of life and pleasures seems to argue in thee something more sublime and excellent than what thy mind contemns, but self-destruction, therefore sought, refutes that excellence thought in thee, and implies not thy contempt, but anguish and regret for loss of life and pleasure overloved. Or if thou covet death as utmost end of misery, so thinking to evade the penalty pronounced, doubt not but God hath wiselier armed his vengeful ire than so to be forestalled. Much more I fear lest death be so snatched will not exempt us from the pain we are by doom to pay. Rather, such acts of contumacy
will provoke the highest to make death in us live. Then let us seek some safer resolution, which methinks I have in view, calling to mind with heed part of our sentence, that thy seed shall bruise the serpent's head, piteous amends, unless be meant, whom I conjecture, our grand foe Satan, who in the serpent hath contrived against us this deceit, to crush his head,
would be revenge indeed, which will be lost by death brought on ourselves, or childless days resolved as thou proposest. We instead shall double ours upon our heads. No more be mentioned then of violence against ourselves and willful barrenness that cuts us off from hope and savors only rancor and pride, impatience and despite, reluctance against God and his just yoke laid on our necks. Remember with what mild and gracious temper he both heard and judged without wrath or reviling. We expected immediate dissolution, which we thought was meant by death that day, when lo, to thee pains only in childbearing were foretold, and bringing forth soon recompensed with joy, fruit of thy womb. On me the curse of slope glanced on the ground. With labor I must earn my bread. What harm? Idleness had been worse. My labor will sustain me, and lest cold or heat should injure us, his timely care hath unbesought provided, and his hands clothed us unworthy, pitying while he judged. How much more, if we pray him, will his ear be open, and his heart to pity incline, and teach us further by what means to shun the inclement seasons, rain, ice, hail, and snow, which now the sky with various face begins to show us in this mountain, while the winds blow moist and keen, shattering the graceful locks of these fair spreading trees, which bids us seek some better shroud, some better warmth to cherish our limbs benumbed, ere this diurnal star leave the cold night. How we his gathered beams reflected may with matter sear foment, or by collision of two bodies grind the air a trite to fire, as late the clouds justling or pushed with winds rude in their shock tine the slant lightning, whose thwart flame driven down kindles the gummy bark of fir or pine, and sends a comfortable heat from afar, which might supply the sun. Such fire to use, and what may else be remedy or cure to evils which our own misdeeds have wrought, he will instruct us, praying, and of grace beseeching him, so as we need not fear to pass commodiously this life, sustained by him with many comforts, till we end in dust, our final rest and native home. What better can we do than to the place repairing where he judged us, prostrate, fall before him reverent, and there confess humbly our faults, and pardon beg with tears watering the ground, and with our sighs the air frequenting, sent from hearts contrite, in sign of sorrow unfeigned and humiliation meek. Undoubtedly he will relent and turn from his displeasure, in whose look serene, when angry most he seemed and most severe, what else but favor, grace, and mercy shown? So spake our father penitent, nor Eve felt less remorse. They forthwith to the place repairing where he judged them, prostrate fell before him reverent, and both confessed humbly their faults, and begged pardon, with tears watering the ground, and with their sighs the air frequenting, sent from hearts contrite, in sign of sorrow unfeigned, and humiliation meek.
Well, well done, everybody. Congratulations. Book 10. That book is brutal, but ends on such a high note. So Adam and Eve have repented, but of course, that doesn't change the fact that sin and death have been unleashed into the world. And so books 11 and 12 will deal with sin and death having been unleashed upon the world. So as a reminder, no session Thursday. Enjoy your Thanksgiving, and we'll come back on Monday because 11 and 12 is very short. We'll finish books 11 and 12 next time, and then you will have completed the Christian epic, Paradise Lost. So I will see y'all in a week. Bye, everybody. Great job.